Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 263, cover dated early July 1990. So this was when the title went on a bi-weekly summer schedule, and this was the third and final summer in a row in which the title did that. So in the course of those 6 additional issues, there were a series of guest artists on the title in between the end of Mark Silvestri's run and the beginning of Jim Lee's. So this cover is by the interior artists. Bill Jaaska is the artist and Joseph Rubinstein is the inker, just as he was in the previous issue. And on the cover here it's Forge, back in Vietnam, and a scene we've seen before in Uncanny X-Men 227, which revealed some of Forge's backstory. So more or less in this issue we get the complete origin of Forge, and also a redemption arc for him as well by the story's conclusion. So let's open this one up, and the opening splash page here entitled The Lower Depths for the Story. We've got Forge and he's down in Morlock Alley, one of the tunnels beneath, a mile deep, the narrative captions tell us, a mile deep beneath Manhattan and running the length of Manhattan. And throughout this issue he's at work on a device, the use of which we learn only at the very end of the issue. So the creative team here, writer Chris Claremont as ever, Bill Jaaska, artist inker Joseph Rubinstein, letterer Tom Orzechowski, and colorist Glynis Oliver. So throughout the issue we have Forge, as in the previous one, flashing back to his time in Vietnam and farther along on his tours of Vietnam. And in this particular one we learn of his being with his team, and they get into a situation which comes later on in the story. But this particular team member here is saying to Forge, "You said you'd see us safe back to the world." And young Forge's response, "I said I'd try my best, Billy." So we'll see whether he can get Jean Grey and Banshee back to the world in this particular issue. So here's this tentacle coming around the back of him as he's working on creating this new gizmo. Catches him off guard as he's lost in his memories of Vietnam. And then we have Bill Jaaska's, it's almost another splash page here, of Jean Grey, who was transformed at the end of the previous issue by the Morlock Masque, who has the power to treat flesh and blood like putty in his hands. And so he has turned her arms into this mass of tentacles, and we see one of those tentacles has a nice sewer rat cradled here. And then this is an interesting little detail from Jaaska here, where he's got little tiny tentacles that are braiding her hair. So over the course of this issue she starts to get used to these new tentacle limbs. And let's continue. So then they have this chat about the Morlock massacre, or the mutant massacre back in X-Men 211. What happened to X-Factor? There's Angel with his wings pinned, and Nightcrawler getting injured as well when they were attacked by the Marauders. And Forge tells her, well, there's a new threat now to the X-Men, and it's the Reavers. And so Jean's kind of philosophical question is, will it never end? Is this what our future holds, Forge? Kill or be killed? In that kind of charnel house world, what happens to the dream that brought the X-Men together, of an Earth where all its children, mutant and not, can live together in peace? And Forge is doesn't know. Beats me, Red, is his response. And they continue the discussion. And also we learn a little bit about whether Jean is able to use her telekinetic powers, and apparently she can't use the limbs and her telekinesis at the same time. So it's one or the other with her, and throughout this issue it'll be these tentacles that she uses in action sequences. There's also a little interesting moment here as Jean is, as the question of whether she's going to be permanently stuck like this will be the case or not. And Forge responds, sometimes being different has nothing to do with being a mutant. I have a leg just like this hand with scars to match. And trust me on this, lady, you really don't want to see me at the beach, stripped down to my shorts. Neither does anyone else, but you learn to live with it. Okay, instead of arms, you've tentacles. What about your telepathic power? And then we're into the business about telekinesis. And it reminded me when I was reading this of a comment by Scott Cyclops in, I think it was Uncanny X-Men 130, right at the beginning of the Dark Phoenix saga, when they were going to that nightclub on Delano Street in Lower Manhattan, and where Scott said something along the lines of, Jean is the most normal looking of us, of the X-Men, this outfit of misfits, and Jean was the most normal looking one. Well, this transformation makes her one of the most abnormal or unusual looking, and it prompts this intervention by Forge in terms of how physical difference isn't constitutive of character, and how there's always somebody who's got it worse. Yes. So interesting little moment there, character moment from Claremont between Forge and Jean. And then we switch to Masque holding court and having taken prisoner at the end of the previous issue Peter Nicholas, aka Amnesiac Colossus. And this lady here that Peter Nicholas has been obsessed with, this beautiful woman, and it is revealed now that she is and has been all along Callisto, and that Masque has used his power to subject her to what Dante in the Divine Comedy called contrapasso, an ironic punishment. So Callisto was, let's say, not the most prepossessing of characters, and Masque has made her practically the most beautiful woman in the world as a punishment. And then he uses this character when she protests at what he does to Peter Nicholas here, giving him these bug's eyes. This other character here, Bliss is the character's name. It's this horrifying power of kind of ejecting this tongue face with fangs that bites her in the neck, and that subdues her. So Masque is lording it over his prisoners, and something he does to ironically mock Callisto is and Peter Nicholas is to turn his flesh into an image of Colossus, because Masque feels that this character, that Peter Nicholas, looks like Colossus, and so that's what he does. He doesn't know that it is Colossus. He thinks that the X-Men are dead and were slain in Dallas. But here, just a note here, Bob Harris, editor, gets the issue of the X-Men's death wrong in X-Men 243. That was the last issue of Inferno in the X-Men title. So, and this just gives me an opportunity to make a comment on Bob Harris's editorial notes in the series. First of all, there are very few of them, and secondly, he makes mistakes. So Bob Harris apparently was a big fan of John Byrne and Chris Claremont's run on the X-Men, but I'm pretty skeptical that he read anything after that run, and the fact that he gets this wrong, which was an issue he edited, he should know that that's not when the team were slain. It really says something about his level of concentration on the pages when they come to him for this kind of annotation. So back to the story and Peter and Callisto. So Masque transforms Callisto back into her original form, and somehow or other she's also dressed in her original leathers as well. And then he gives them an hour to get out of the tunnels, and then he says his creatures will hunt them down. But all the while, and the colorist Glynis Oliver could have colored this better. It's clearer in the Essentials Black and White edition. This is one of Forge's I Spies, he calls them, drones. So Forge, like 30 years ahead of where we're at with drones for surveillance, yes. And he's been following along what's been happening with Masque and Callisto and Peter Nicholas here. And so the X-Men are on the way to the rescue. But first of all, we have this scene set in a nightclub in Washington, D.C. This is a pretty interesting scene. So this character here turns out to be Val Cooper, and she is brought to a meeting with, as it turns out, a colonel of the Russian or Soviet KGB. So this guy last appeared in Uncanny X-Men 190, Colonel Vazhin. He's kind of like the Soviet Nick Fury. And so he has asked Val to attend this meeting where they're going to talk about the state of the world and mutant affairs and threats in the world. So he says to her, mutants are resolving themselves into factions, choosing up sides, each with its own agenda and goals. To name but a few of the major players: the Mutant Liberation Front, a creature who calls himself Apocalypse, another known as Mr. Sinister, plus another who remains as yet unidentified. It is no longer a question of criminals acting to gain for themselves a modicum of wealth and power, but of political and military forces seeking dominion over the globe itself. And in this brave new world, Dr. Cooper, ordinary non-superpowered humanity may well have no place. Magneto was the first, but he at least presumed that we could all coexist, simply with mutant kind on top. Jaaska exemplifies his worst nightmare, a country wherein mutants are little better than slaves. So, and there's more of this speech. So Tom Orzechowski really earning his paycheck on this page. And what's significant here is this other who remains as yet unidentified. So speculation is that who Vazhin is half knowledgeable about as one of these leaders of a mutant faction is the Shadow King, yes? So he's got an inkling of the Shadow King out there working away, but doesn't quite know who exactly it is. And some of the kind of subtext of his talk here reminds me of some of what was going on in the mid-80s in terms of Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns, where there was a re-evaluation of what it would be like for superheroes, no longer the Silver Age type superheroes, but superheroes in the 1980s to live and operate in the world of the 1980s, yes? This grimmer, grittier world. And it's coming out here in this dialogue between Val and Vazhin. And then it's worth reading out what he says in the last panel here. Imagine Beirut on a global scale. Imagine a comparative handful of people having the same effect on the biosphere as a full-fledged strategic nuclear exchange. Imagine the death, Doctor, the devastation. In the past, the superheroes somehow enforced a code of conduct that prevented things from getting out of hand. That's the 60s, that's the 70s. But that old order is breaking down. Not so long ago, many of the world's supervillains united in a concerted, coordinated assault on the heroes. That's acts of vengeance. It was repulsed this time. I fear this is a new game, Dr. Cooper, with no rules at all, and no matter which faction wins, we, Homo sapiens, will lose. So all of this was built up for a mooted grand crossover that was to be the Mutant War, which didn't happen, but which got turned into Extinction Agenda. So interesting to imagine this original envisioned grand crossover among all the X titles and probably other titles of the Marvel Universe, the Mutant War. Didn't happen though, turned into Extinction Agenda. Then we go back to the Morlock tunnels with Forge. And so he's got his gizmo developed that he was working on in the original splash page, and he's still thinking back to Vietnam. And here we go. This is kind of like the origin story here for Forge. His worst moment where his team are stuck in the Vietnamese highlands. There's bad weather, so they can't be helicoptered out. and there is a division, pretty much a division of North Vietnamese army going to roll down the valley in which they are. And as this guy says, anyone see a flick called the 300 Spartans? Well, bros, that's us. So this is going to be a tough fight for them, and they're quite concerned about what's going to happen, and they're looking to Sergeant Forge to get them out of it alive. And then we get Banshee's hand on Forge's shoulders. He snaps out of his memories, his reverie, and here we have poor Banshee with no mouth, and because of Masque's transformation of him with his power over flesh. Caption here: without a mouth, apologies to Harlan Ellison, he can't scream, Banshee. But also, as Forge realizes, or eat or drink, most likely, Masque's way of keeping him on a short leash. So then they have contact, and they go after Masque. And we pick up with Callisto and Peter Nicholas Colossus, and Callisto falling over in the tunnel. And the reason for that is there's a physical transformation occurring. She's transforming back into this beautiful woman. And as she says herself, Masque gets his giggles by giving me the illusion that I can still be who and what I was, but it never lasts. And each reversion to this beautiful form comes quicker than the last. I keep fighting to hold on to myself, but more and more the form defines the content. The fake becomes reality. The package doesn't matter, Callisto, Colossus says, only what's inside. All I am anymore, Peter, is a package. I won't believe that. I refuse. So then Masque's monsters catch up with them. I like this page. I like the 8 panels, these vertical panels, and the fight storytelling and dynamics by Jaaska. I think these pages are well done, actually. The 2 of these pages, they look really nice. So good work by him. And this is probably the highlight of this series of fill-in issues in terms of the quality of the art. And I think Rubinstein's inks do complement Jaaska. And I like this use of geoshade here on the side of Colossus's face as well. So a little bit of care and attention going into the art on this particular issue. So then Masque stabs Colossus, and remember, this isn't organic steel, so he stabs him into the shoulder, but it proves to be a mistake on Masque's part. So then tentacle armed Jean attacks Masque, and then we have Forge still flashing back to Vietnam, and the North Vietnamese army cutting down his team. And so it's a counterpoint to the present day story in the Morlock tunnels. So as things are going badly in the tunnels, things are going badly for his team in Vietnam. They're all dying one by one, with only Forge left alive. And then it turns out, as I said, Masque made a mistake with Colossus. So the shock of the stabbing trips a subconscious switch, and Colossus taps into his mutant ability to transform into organic steel. So this is truly a Colossus in his organic form, but he's still amnesiac, right? And then we have Callisto here, so he's fighting to protect Callisto. She's reverted to this beautiful form, and so he's protecting her from the monsters. And then we have Forge, and we saw this back in Uncanny X-Men 227, where when his team was all dead, he used this spell that he had learned when he was training up to be a shaman of the Cheyenne, which is his Native American tribe. And he uses the spirits of his dead team members to attack and annihilate the North Vietnamese army. It's a shameful thing for him. As he says here, determined to avenge my men's deaths, whatever the cost, and calling on my powers as a shaman, using a spell so obscene it still shames me to think of it. I did. He killed them all, right? All the North Vietnamese. But as he thinks to himself here, I'm older now, like to think wiser. Hopefully I found a better way. So can he do better here? Can he get everyone out alive from this situation? And here he's created this little I Spy device here, which is pretty cool, the way it moves around through the panels. And he finally confronts Masque here, just as all of the X-Men, Colossus, Callisto, they're all down. So it's up to Forge now to save the day. What's he going to do? How's he going to deal with this? So number one, Masque sets Bliss on Forge, but Forge uses his bionic hand to punch out the head of this monstrous figure and knocks it out entirely. So then Masque himself gets ready to get physical, make contact and fight Forge one-on-one, but look who intervenes from behind. It's Colossus in his techno-organic steel form, grabs Masque by the throat and slams him up against the wall. Pretty nicely done. And now they have Masque to their advantage, and they threaten to kill him here. By the way, I just want to note that this really looks like John Byrne's Colossus here on these in these panels. Pretty cool by Jaaska. And even Jean gets into the business, wrapping her tentacles around Masque, and they're pretty much ready to kill him, to break his neck. And he calls in his teleporter, who's called Bouncer apparently, teleports the X-Men away, everyone away, throw them back where they belong. They'll see, he says here. I like the way Orzechowski has lettered the text here in tiny lettering to just show how deflated he is as he slumps to the floor. They'll learn in no time at all. They'll come crawling to me for mercy, he says, because he figures they're not going to be able to get back to their former selves physically. But here we go. It turns out that in the previous issue, Forge, when he was injecting them, he was taking tissue samples, and from the very beginning of this issue, from the splash page, he was working on inventing a gizmo that would be able to transform them back into their former selves by working on their native genetic code. So that's what we get explained here in the dialogue between Jean and Banshee, but they're delighted to be back to normal. And they talk about, interestingly, they talk about Colossus and how he's amnesiac. The body remembers, not Peter himself, Jean says. Doesn't seem so, says Banshee. No recognition of us or memories of his life with the X-Men. And I'll tell you straight, Jean, I'm wondering if that's so bad a thing, or would the crime be dragging him back to this murderous, madcap life of ours? I wish I knew. And then they think about Forge. So this was Claremont's kind of plan for Colossus, to give him a happy ever after with Callisto. And then that gets ruined in the Shadow King storyline by editorial dictate from Bob Harris, but that's in the future still. And then we pick up with Forge, who is up on the roof of Peter Nicholas's Soho apartment building, and he is celebrating here the fact that on this occasion he was able to get his team members out alive, and he's thinking of his dead teammates. I got him out, bros, he says. This time, this outfit, I kept my word. I didn't break faith. Alive and safe and whole, I brought my people home. And the sun sets there. So a nice arc of redemption for Forge, who's had it tough and hard, going all the way back to Life Debt number 1, or part 1, Uncanny X-Men 186, when we first had an inkling of his time in Vietnam, the loss of his arm and leg, and then in the Fall of the Mutant storyline, the fact that he had cast that spell and used the spirits and souls of his dead teammates to kill the North Vietnamese soldiers, and that he was ashamed of it. So in some small way, this has been a redemptive arc for Forge here, and pretty good stuff from Claremont and the artists, I think, in this particular issue. So I do hope that you enjoyed this review. If you did so, please like the video. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.